Give people a moment to get settled. I'll say thank you very much for showing up, given that it was a secret session on the agenda, and now we got a full room, so I'm pretty pleased about that. I'm Todd Mancini, product manager for Developer Tools. I'm joined on the stage by Pete Muir, who's one of our lead technical directors in our Developer Tools. And I didn't know his title, so I just called him Developer Guru James Stachan, who will be assisting us today as well. So thank you very much for the pleasure of your time this morning. You will note I am sporting this beautiful OpenShift.io t-shirt. On the way out, you will get a card, and if you bring that down to the expo floor to our developer area, I forget what the name, what's it called? The Dev Zone, thank you. I just got Summit brain going. Dev Zone, you can get one of these shirts with that card, and you can get all sorts of other swag if you go on some quests, if you will. So Mike Charette will, I'm sure, be able to explain more of that later. But I assume people are here to learn more about OpenShift.io. Yes, that's why we're here. Great, all right. So hopefully people were interested in the announcement. What I'm going to do is I'll just do a little bit of talking. I'll let Pete and James kind of really show this stuff so you guys can really get a feel for it. But what I wanted to do is, first of all, just remind people that Red Hat does have this awesome developer program that we've been building up for about 3 or so years now. Definitely join, free to join. Just go to developers.redhat.com, and you can, for example, download all the stuff you would ever want, right? If you're like, wow, I want a copy of RHEL so I could do some development on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you want our Eclipse tooling, whatever it may be, you get all that stuff there. And we have some great content. We're constantly pushing new content up there. One of the things that's been super popular are our cheat sheets and our quick starts. So all available to anyone that registers in the developer program. So, but I want to tell you about OpenShift.io and how we got to this place. Why did we even embark on this journey of creating OpenShift.io? And I don't think anyone in this room is going to be surprised by the fact that people on stage these days tend to like to say things like that every company is a software company. But what's really interesting is if you actually go and look at what was voted as the top 30 innovations of the past 30 years, a full 20 of them are directly related to computers and software. So it is absolutely the driving force of change and competition. And there's this just a demand of all of our customers that we are able to innovate faster, we need to compete more, and we need to do that by adopting practices like continuous delivery, right? People, when they have their smartphones and they're used to their Uber app or whatever it may be being updated, several times a week maybe, they expect that of all applications, even if they're the oldest of the, enterprise type applications. And the reality is, time to market becomes so important. Those that can move fast win. So all of you in this room that are developers, you are the engine of competition. And we see this in the way organizations are spending their money, massive decrease in kind of traditional product development and product manufacturing, massive increases in just allocating funding to software creation and service offerings. And when we look where talent is being hired, everyone I think here knows it's not really a challenge to be employed in this industry. Massive hiring for people with programming capabilities. Data scientists are probably one of the fastest growing ones right now. So, but what we're finding is, great, we know how to write software, so what's the problem? We'll just keep doing that, right? But the way we build software, most of us, is really starting to fail. That we have so much weight and so much process, and it's really starting to have these development processes crumble underneath themselves. People have said I'm attributed with having said that if our industry was the construction industry, we'd all get all these houses built, and then days later they'd all be falling down, right? There's this, I learned about this city in China that apparently that kind of happened, and all these like unqualified contractors went in, they erected this huge city, and now it's like this abandoned wasteland of falling down buildings. When we see what the challenges are, when we talk about where do issues typically creep in, we see a lot of issues where people have production environments that are different than their development environments, massive environmental changes. That lack of fidelity leads to those bugs that you only find in production, and we know how expensive those can be. And we also know that everyone's trying to move to this world of these orchestrated microservices. I mean, microservices are really a great way to achieve continuous delivery because you get such awesome isolation with the different parts of your system. You don't have to deploy this one massive monolith where you touch it and poke it in one area and it breaks in another. Getting that degree of isolation is so important, and microservices really do make that achievable. The other thing we've seen, though, is at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves. Everything we do pretty much day to day is just guessing, right? We just guess. We say, oh, let's go make this change to the software because we think it's going to do something good, right? And the worst thing is oftentimes the guesses that we make, we don't verify them. What do? We say, hey, let's go change the icon for the shopping cart to be a bigger icon because we think more people will then complete a shopping transaction when they go to do a checkout. We say, all right, that's great, let's go do that, right? And then what happens is we then write, go make the icon bigger, and what's the acceptance test for that? The icon is bigger, right? Which kind of lost track of the fact that the acceptance test should have been that more shoppers completed a shopping transaction. So we got this massive disconnect between what the business is saying the software changes should be and why they should be. These are all our guesses. And then how we prove whether or not we had success. And we high-five each other when the icon is bigger on screen. But maybe actually we have fewer customers checking out because it's really annoying to see that massively big icon. We've got to get past having these guesses. So some scary statistics. I think people here are aware of these, but some of these I find incredibly interesting. Now, we got the kind of standard chaos type statistics. Still doesn't change. 71% of projects today are still considered challenged or failed by the people that worked on them when they're finally completed. Although we have noticed in the past 10 years or so that agile software projects do have a 4-time success rate over traditional waterfall projects. So agile is working. Now, that's not saying that Scrum is working or XP is working. It's really talking more about truly agile methods. And I think continuous delivery as one of them is super important. So when we talk about continuous delivery, so I ask customers, and are you going to continuous delivery? And 50% of them say, yes, we are. We're going there soon. And I'm like, oh, can I see your basic plan for doing so? And only 12% of them can even produce a plan. So everyone says they're doing it, but no one has a way to do it. Developers come onto projects, they spend half their time just understanding what the software is and what the project does. Their managers say, we got to go to the cloud, but more than half my team doesn't understand how to do cloud-based development. And for me, one of the scariest statistics, and one of the reasons that this is kind of the first thing I highlighted this morning during the keynote, is only 23% of developers today, when asked, are you confident in the software stack choices you've made for a project? Only 23% of them say yes. More than 3/4 of them are unconfident about what they're doing. Defects are abundant. 750 defects in every 50,000 lines of Java code, for example. Those are bugs that get to production. And when you have that bug in production, what does it cost you? Well, it turns out it costs you $336,000 per hour. And how long does it take to fix one of those bugs? It takes about 200 minutes, right? So that's what, 2.5, 3 hours? That's not good, right? If many of you are deploying Java apps that are what? Who has a 50,000 line Java app, right? Who has a 1,000,000 line Java app, right? See? Some of you probably have 10 million line Java apps. These numbers get big and scary real quickly. And then the last thing, developers wow, it's really hard for me to get the stuff I need. I need equipment. I need an environment to run in. 75% of the developers say that's really challenging. And so they make these requests of procurement, and finally it shows up, and it's not the right thing, or it comes really late. So what happens is, if you go across organizations, especially in enterprises, the dev and test infrastructure they've set up is only utilized about 10%. 90% of that hardware is just sitting idle, burning electricity, being bad for the planet. It's we got to do something about this. So we want people to think. So we thought about those challenges. And we said, what would a new and better world look like? And we had these very interesting meetings where we came up with interesting project names, which is a story for another day. But we decided if people could just move to this kind of end-to-end integrated cloud-native development environment, like if it was just there that they could use, that was instantly available, that would solve massive amount of the problems. Then we said, we got to make it so it's super easy for people to do deployment pipelines. That include doing things like integration testing, doing staged deployments, doing a clean rolling deployment when you're finally going out to production, safely migrating transactions from old versions of the software to the new. And then we hired a bunch of data scientists and we said, let's start looking at code. Let's start analyzing code. We have a ton of code internally at Red Hat, obviously. It's actually not internal at Red Hat because it's all open source, so you all have access to it too. And then we looked at all the other open source projects out there, ones we don't even use. We start analyzing them. We're like, what information can we extract from that? It's an amazingly interesting big data problem. And how do we start applying that to the code you guys are working on today? How do we make that become a reality? And that led to OpenShift.io, which really, in essence, talks about doing this virtuous cycle. And we kind of just view that virtuous cycle in 3 different phases: an analysis phase, a planning phase, and a creation phase. And it just repeats. So what does analysis mean? That means you look at the world around you. It might be, here's a business problem to solve. It may be, hey, that server over there is running at 99% CPU capacity. Right? There are technical measures, there are business measures, there's all kinds of measures we can do, but it's taking those inputs, you look at them, you come up with some hypotheses. So rather than guessing, let's use a nicer word, let's say hypothesis, where a hypothesis implies you have a way to verify it. Right? So maybe you said, hey, we don't like the shopping conversions we're getting, so we're going to make the shopping cart icon bigger, and the hypothesis is that in doing so, we will increase our sales conversion rate. Take that, put that in a plan, sign that work out to people, have them create stuff. Now, creation today for us starts with the developer, but we want the future of OpenShift.io to include testers and designers and business analysts and every other person that has stuff that they need to create as part of something. And what do? You take that, you create it, you get it deployed and running, and then you look at it again, you analyze it again. You just keep doing that over and over. So that's my preamble. So why don't I turn it over to Pete, who will jump into the product. So this morning, because timing was so critical, we kind of went the video route, which, funny enough, failed at one point. So it's unclear what to say for. But this is OpenShift.io. Here it is, absolutely running in Pete's browser. How could we prove that? You can click on it. So. And where should we go first? Should we create a new project? Would that be interesting? Want to go into a project? How about we create a new space? So Pete's creating a new space. He just gives it a name. And we kind of went really quickly over this notion of the template. So the template really is about configuring your space in a meaningful way. Today, we'll be honest that configuration is fairly light, but we have a grand vision for how templates can really augment the way a space is set up and runs. But as you can see, Pete has 4 different choices here: Agile, Scrum, issue tracking, and scenario-driven planning. So the first 3 probably sound familiar to you. Like everyone kind of knows what Agile is generically. People know what Scrum is. Issue tracker is kind of like what you get in a GitHub type world. It's like just endless lists of issues. But scenario-driven planning is interesting. I'll take a moment on this one. This is actually the model we use in our group. So when we go and do planning and development, we follow scenario-driven planning. So what is it? So scenario-driven planning takes an extremely hyper-customer-focused view of the world. It is not about planning features. If all you do is plan features, you get massively bloated software. And a lot of organizations do this today. They like, let me take this feature, and in the next version, we got to make that feature better, and all the other features better, and keep more and more features. But in scenario-driven planning, you start with a scenario, a real-world problem that a customer has, and you break it down into the value propositions that the customer will realize if the scenario is met, and you break it also down into the experiences. So imagine the experience like you're writing the demo script for how you would show that scenario being resolved in your product. You're writing the demo script first. right? Because oftentimes if you did that first, you would come up with a much better user experience than when we kind of build a lot of technology and then we're like, oh, how are we going to string that all together? So that's kind of the essence of scenario-based planning. So go ahead and create the space. And now it's created, and that's it. It's done. He could start using it right away, but he's got a few kind of little helpers that he can call upon. And the one we like the most is this select a technology stack and pipeline. So it takes a moment because there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to analyze what's there, and it's parsing out a bunch of data to figure out all the available application stacks. And now he's got all these application stacks available. You can see Vertex is the default one there. But these are various runtimes. A lot of people are interested in Spring Boot. You can do Spring Boot. We're going to add many, many more here. Now, some of you that are super astute are probably like, hey, those all look like Java runtimes, and they are. It's fair to say, our primary expertise has been in the Java world. Most of our customers have been Java customers. But that is not what OpenShift.io is about. That was just what we have today. We were very quickly on a path to include .NET, JavaScript for Node.js type applications, and probably likely Python after that if we had to guess.
And Gorkum and I are doing a session straight after this one to show you a little bit more about Che, which I think Todd will talk about in a minute. Yep. And Gorkum is going to do a Node.js example with Che in that. So.
Fantastic. So go ahead and we'll do Vertex for now. Why not? So there's another announcement that kind of was out today about the Red Hat OpenShift application runtimes, and I get a credit point every time I say that correctly because that's a mouthful, or ROAR, as they like to say. And so Vertex is one of those application stacks that you can use there from ROAR. And lastly, pipelines. James Stachan has been so key in bringing a lot of the experiences they have on the Fabric 8 project, which hopefully you've heard of. Fabric 8 is kind of essentially the upstream and the ancestral father of OpenShift.io. And one of the great things about the way the Fabric 8 team has worked, and I'm sure James will talk about this, is their adoption of these continuous practices. And right now, Pete has basically extracted all the knowledge that James has by just clicking a radio button and going on from there. And why is there? Wow, I didn't even know there was a next on the screen. What is next? See, this product, it's continuous delivery, so it even has new features when I look at it from like 3 days ago. So apparently there's another step that I didn't even know that was in here. So let's all see it together. Apparently it's the loading next step. Oh, the organizational data. So this is about getting your GitHub repository set up. So so one of the ways we got to where we are today on the day we did, we wanted to make sure we got launched on today at Summit. So OpenShift.io does not today include its own Git repository. It relies upon GitHub. So if you have a GitHub account, great, you can already start using it. And we believe there's actually a really good marriage there between what OpenShift.io delivers and what GitHub has. And we will augment that with other capabilities and error messages. But we'll add in other integrations for other Git providers, including your own, in the near future. So, all right. So this is why we've never gone to this screen before, because it clearly does something wrong. But
oh, okay.
Oh, with a different name.
Different name here.
Yeah, see what
And somewhere there's someone furiously redeploying pods in OpenShift somewhere right now, setting up OAuth tokens.
I'm not sure this is going to work, but
Oh, we'll get out of this.
Yeah.
It could work. James likes what he sees. He thinks this is going smooth. So once this is done, then what we'll do is we'll go into that same Trade Insights application we showed today. So this one was basically built with that same Vertex thing. So this is the Analyze page. And once again, in this first kind of developer preview, admittedly, it's fairly light. It's a great way for you to quickly get to kind of the hot items in your space, work that's been assigned to you, things like that. But we really want to start bringing in massive amounts of data into this, like real-time monitoring, things like that. That's to come. But you will see that stack reports that kind of gives you some deep insights of potential issues in your currently deployed code is available here. Maybe worth a view, since that's the part that failed in the video today. So this is showing us that this build that Pete rolled out actually has a security vulnerability in it, a bunch of dependencies. I think one or two of these metrics is probably not real yet, because I don't think there was 1,024 files in your sample app. If there were, we're going to have a discussion on the definition of microservice, perhaps, because that doesn't sound right. But it also shows you, like, hey, here are some of the dependencies that are in the application and recommended versions to upgrade to. All that data is real. There's 1,024 files in that?
Maybe that's including dependencies.
Oh, including all the dependencies. That's what it is. Oh, okay. Interesting. All right, well, it just shows that you bring in like one little innocent left pad dependency, and the next thing you know, your application has 147,000 lines of code. Great.
Scroll down again. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. It shows the number of files on the right.
Oh, number of files is there on the right. Look at that. Yeah. Fantastic. So there, yes, it's the log back. That's the one that I added, and that's the one that brought in 345.
And that's the one that's causing the CV.
And it's gone the CV. So I'm a product manager. I once was a software developer. I'm not anymore, so that's why I'm responsible. Great. So let's get out of here. So shall we go to planning? So in planning, this is where you do have this backlog. If you go through here, can you scroll down a bit? It is, at some point, hierarchical in nature, I think, is yours.
This one doesn't appear to be.
That one's not. So you can do a hierarchical breakdown. So if you have that scenario and you want to break it down by value props and experiences, then you break those down usually by features and further on by development tasks and things like that. You certainly can do that in here. The task board is the view I like better. I just feel it's a more natural way of kind of doing agile planning. Great for stand-ups. If the video was working better, I love using a touchscreen type tablet for these. You can just drag it with your finger, which is really cool. But this is a great way to assign work out, kind of get details on things, link things together to indicate dependencies between one task and another. The kinds of things you'd expect in some agile planning tools. And if you come to the Che talk, which is the one immediately after this one, we'll go much deeper into what's going on in Create. This is where really the rubber hits the road. And we think this is one of the real key differentiators, is the fact that you can so quickly create one of these environments. Like I said, I said it takes under a minute. I think the environment that I made for the demonstration took about 33 seconds to create. And I will tell you that as someone who has a rich history with a lot of IDEs, I've really been amazed at how much I like using Eclipse Che. If you had told me 3 years ago you're going to actually enjoy using an IDE in a browser, I really would have not thought that possible, because I would have felt like I was going to be so limited in what I can do. But there's two important things here. First of all, Che as an IDE is actually really good. It works well, it's fast, even though you're remoted into this cloud-based environment. The speed is great. But the other thing is, because Che has these workspaces, this development environment that's been built for you, the fact that gets everything set up for you automatically and correctly, and then everything just runs there, that buys you so much that a lot of the things that you needed to do in those more traditional desktop IDEs just goes away. Like, you don't have the same kind of problems. So Pete's in here, he's changing code. He's probably going to put in some inappropriateness.
There we are, yeah.
Yeah, so as you can see, you get full autocomplete and all that. So you'll see all of that in the Che talk. Unit testing's in there. And the fact that you can just run the application directly in here. Now, the other thing that's of course he doesn't. So he can build it. He didn't install the run command. But it doesn't matter that he didn't install the run command, because unlike some other environments where they try to like protect you, and I love the fact that this makes it super easy for even a fairly intermediate level developer to be productive. What stinks is when your code doesn't build. But what really stinks is when, if you're more of a power user, you're denied the opportunity to do the things you want to do. So as Pete goes and fixes his weird error.
What that's about?
Is pick a string?
Yeah, it is. I don't know.
But Pete can actually go to a terminal window. And he can just run Maven commands, look at his whole containerized environment, do rm/rf, whatever, right? Whatever floats your boat. And everything is just there. It runs and operates super fast. And that's because behind the scenes, we are making use of OpenShift Online. And it's a tremendous environment in which to do work. And Pete is now doing a Maven compile and Vertex run. And sure enough, look at that. He actually got it running. Pretty good. So now he can hit it with a curl command. So, and if something's not installed here, if the curl command wasn't there, you could yum install things. And you can't. Maybe not today. And the data came back. So that's all good. So Che's looking great, but we're getting close on time.
Yep.
And then the build pipelines are actually pretty impressive. So what you see here is Pete already had one. If he goes to the full view, the one that he just did if it does a code change, that's going to be queued up to do a future build. But once again, we don't hide anything from you, so Pete can go into a view log. And we have SSO with our Jenkins backend system, so it is a Jenkins-based build process. Full access to the administrative console there to go look at the current run, see how it's behaving, get all the build logs, see all the prior runs, all that. So if you want to go into the 1997-ish UI that is Jenkins, you're free to do so. But if you don't want to go there, you don't have to, and you can just stay in OpenShift.io. And Pete can do a promotion and all that.
And I was going to just say as well, this is all controlled by Jenkins files that sit inside your source code. So, we're not doing magic here. We're not creating these pipelines for you. If you want, these pipelines definitions are carefully crafted by us to work well, but they're just Groovy files. You can just change them, add stages, remove stages, do different things with them. So this is not, we're not locking you into that one setup. This is
Did you say Groovy?
It is Groovy, yeah.
Well, speaking of Groovy files, why don't we invite James onto stage? He knows a little thing or two about Groovy, I'm sure. And
Thank you. One thing to mention, by the way, about this demo is everything's running on OpenShift, right? So often developers have like Windows laptops or whatever, and you test on Windows and then deploy on Linux. The important thing to remember on this is everything's running on OpenShift as containers. So you're developing on the same environment as production, right? You're developing on containers. Everything you're seeing on screen is in the container. So you're developing and testing and running on the same platform all the time, which saves a huge amount of time, right? Never test on Windows, never test on a Mac. Test in Linux containers all the time.
And I was going to say, before we came in, my Surface just won't connect to the video in here. So rather than panicking, as you normally do when you can't do a demo because you can't get your laptop to work, I just logged into the web browser over there. All I needed was my password. And apart from the fact I can't use the keyboard and the mouse because it's not what I'm used to, it's all fine and working.
Exactly. So
I had to say that I did a demo last week, and I ran it off my phone plugged into a docking station. Just use Chrome on here, and it worked fine. So we can show that if people want to see that later.
Exactly. So I guess I should talk about Upstream, shouldn't I?
Please.
Yes. So everything you've seen on screen, everything on OpenShift.io is all open source, right? We're Red Hat, so everything we do is open source.
Open core, did you say?
Open source.
Oh, open
I was
source.
very careful
Open
not to
core
say
isn't real
core.
open source, is it?
We're not open core. We're a non-open core. We're close. No, we're a non-open core company. So everything's open source, right? And what Red Hat does is we have a strong separation between upstream communities and products. So OpenShift.io is the product, the free platform for developing. The code behind OpenShift.io is all in an open source project called Fabric 8, Fabric with an 8. So fabric8.io is the website. Fabricate as in sounds like to fabricate, to make things, right? So Fabric 8 is the Upstream open source project. Now, it's been around for maybe 4 years now. It actually started before Docker, if you can imagine such a thing. And we actually use Fabricate to fabricate. So we use Fabricate to build Fabricate itself, right? We started Fabricate with just one Git repo. So it started off as a monolith with a single release process, right? And then over time, we started decoupling it and making more and more separate microservices. When it got to about 8 different microservices, it used to take me or another person on my team an entire day to do a release. Because you'd release the first Git repository and get a new version, then you go to the next Git repository and update the POM or the package.json with a new version, then you wait for that to release and stage, and then you do the next one and the next one and the next one. It used to take an entire day of watching scripts and tarring logs and all this kind of crap. Now we're up to about 250 Git repositories, right? So you can imagine doing a release of 250 different microservices. That would take quite a lot of time if it was manual. So what we ended up doing with Fabricate is building continuous delivery pipelines to automate all of this stuff, right? So now with a relatively small team, we're able to release 250 different microservices all the time, right? Now let me just describe that a little bit because it's kind of cool. What we started off doing was we'd release the first thing, and then when you're releasing the second project, it would look to see, is there a new version of my dependencies? And if so, update them on the fly, right? So each project would update its dependencies as it was about to be released. What we found, though, was you'd do a change upstream, and then no one else would notice you've broken something until you're just about to release, which is normally the time when you're trying to get a new feature out. So we switched to do a much better job, where now whenever we do an upstream release, that release pipeline then automatically generates pull requests against all the downstream projects. So the first project to release, it will, as part of the pipeline, it submits pull requests against all the other projects. When you submit a pull request on all the downstream projects, that then generates continuous integration pipelines, which then runs all the tests on the downstream project. If that works, it then merges, depending on whether you've got human approval or not. And then that kicks on then a CD pipeline of then downstream. So automatically, we make one code change upstream, and everything just automatically goes through continuous integration and continuous delivery all the way down. So we're using Fabricate to automate all of our continuous integration and continuous delivery of all of our software, including Fabricate.io. Another thing which is really, really cool is OpenShift.io is changing pretty quickly, right? We're developing code really quickly and getting features out live. Whenever we make a code change in the UI, for example, there's, I think, maybe 6 or 7 different Git repos with different NPM modules and whatnot that make up the UI. If ever you make a code change in any of the UI modules, it regenerates a new Docker container for that pull request and stages the UI. And in GitHub, you get a pull request comment with a URL to test out the UI. So every time there's a UI change, you get to visually try out the UI before you've even merged it yet. And then if you're happy, you click merge, then a real continuous delivery pipeline kicks in. It does a real release with a new version, and it goes out to production with human approval. So that's pretty much all I had to say, I guess, about Upstream. So Fabricate is the Upstream. I guess another thing I should mention is what's awesome about Fabricate is we're looking at the complete end-to-end development cycle for developers, from analysis, planning, coding, development, testing, staging, operating, and so forth, the entire end-to-end. So Fabricate is kind of huge because it's doing kind of everything. So it's got planning in there, work item tracking in there, it's got Eclipse chain integration and IDE, it's got technologies for doing builds and deployments and staging and continuous integration and continuous delivery. It's got all the analytics that you saw in for analyzing stacks and whatnot. It's kind of huge. But what I would say is it's an awesome open source project. It's the most fun I've ever had in open source. It's amazing. Please join and have a play. If you know any developers, tell them to do it as well. It's awesome. If you're wondering whereabouts to start, the bit I'd recommend is the stuff I work on mostly. It's the continuous delivery pipeline section, right? We have an amazing library of pipelines that do automating builds, staging, system testing, integration testing, load testing, unit testing and whatnot, and rollouts. What we have is pretty awesome, but I'm sure you can think of new things it could do, right? I'm sure there's different things you'd like to do in your pipelines. I'm sure there's different tools you'd like us to use. So that's the perfect place to start, where you can fork all of our libraries, hack around with it, and submit your pull requests, please, or issues. I think that's all I had to say about Fabricate Upstream.
All right, so we still have a few minutes, so I imagine some people may have a question or two. So why don't we see if there's a question right there. Do we have a hand mic or anything? We're just gonna. I'll just repeat the questions.
I'll yell. Is there going to be an enterprise version of this, and what's the prerequisites? You need an OpenShift platform. Can you run this on-prem?
So the question is, will we have a productized on-premise enterprise offering? So the plan is yes to do that. When we feel the product is good enough to do so. I mean, it's certainly lacking, like it doesn't have an integration with like enterprise directories, LDAP, and things like that. So there's some things like that we need to do. When you have the product and you bring it on-prem, yes, we assume it would require it to be running on OpenShift. That's where we build it. That's how we run it. So that's kind of how we would support it. But that would be the essential model we would have there.
We currently run this on 2 OpenShift clusters. So we have one OpenShift cluster, which is kind of where all the shared services run. So the UIs are served out of, the planning database runs,
The
etc.
key cloak for the
The
single
key
sign-on.
cloak, the SSO runs in our shared space. And then we also use OpenShift Online to run all of what we call the tenant services. So your Che, your Jenkins build pods, they're all actually running in the OpenShift Online cluster. And that's running in your namespace. So in fact, if we didn't show this, but if I go here and go here and go here, I can get to the OpenShift console after a login.
We got the SSO working. That's good, right?
And you can go to the projects, and you can see, in fact, these are all the different OpenShift projects I've got. So you can see we're running Che, we're running Jenkins, we're giving you the different environments like run and stage. So, I mean, if you want things to work, I wouldn't recommend going in there and fiddling around with these things, but you can actually go in and look at the way the deployment configs are set up or the pipelines are set up in here. We're giving you access to all of that. So all of your services are kind of running in your OpenShift Online.
Yeah, definitely. Other questions? Yes?
If you want to modify your J container to have new tools, can you update like the Docker file and rebuild it for you? Or?
Yes, yes. You can configure it in...
So the question was, can you reconfigure the
Che containers to
container?
add new tools and stuff?
Yeah.
Well, stay around for the next talk because that's going to be all about Che.
Yep.
But yes, absolutely, you can customize your Che stacks to be whatever you want. Put any tools in there you like. Work with any programming language you like. Work with any compilers, tools, and whatnot.
We give you a lot of rope to hang yourself with. I mean, it is, we didn't lock much down in here because, like I said, as open source developers ourselves, we don't like it when things are locked down. We like it that the happy path is super easy and anyone can navigate it. But if we want to get into things, we want to get into them and be able to make those kinds of changes. So yeah.
So the only restriction, and the reason why when Todd said, can you yum install things, and I said no, is so we don't run containers with root privileges. We think that's really important. So whilst I'm inside that container there, I can't install anything. But the Che stack is a Docker file, and in the Docker file, you can get root privileges and so run yum and install other things. That's how we install our tools into the stacks, right? That's the Fabricate Analytics plugin that you saw running in Che in the keynote. That's simply something we install into the container for you.
Other questions? Yes, please.
What languages do you have analytics for, and what are the plans?
What languages do we have analytics for, and what are the plans? So in OpenShift.io today, the only analytics that are turned on for normal people that go and use it is for Java. We already have analytics working for Node, Python.
So we have good analytics for Node, and we're working on Python at the moment.
And we got a roadmap that hits gems and everything else, right? So we'll kind of knock them down in kind of popularity order, and the intention is like, oh well, this is version 1, and we'll roll those out in version 2, like in a year. We don't view it that way. Actually, the version number is, well, it's in the about box.
Yeah.
Like it changes daily. It changes hourly, right? So we don't talk about version 2 or 3. We talk about version 7:18 a.m. today, right? Because we're constantly adding new features and capabilities. So this is, 2017-05-01, that was yesterday, right? No, that's today. That was
that's
yesterday, my watch is off. At 2100
Well, that's 2100 UTC.
UTC, okay. So people were still working late yesterday, apparently. And if you go to that About box later today, it may be changed again. So yeah, but honestly, understand this, the most important thing to us is the community around this. So it's really not what we decide should be the right next language or the right next set of analytics. It's what you all decide should be the right next language, right analytics, right? You all have an equal ability to be a part of making that decision as we do, right? And it's super important to us, you know.
And Sri Krishna, who leads the team for that part, is talking in this room, I think at the last session.
Last
I
session
think it's
today.
4:30 p.m.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was going to mention there is that when you get access to the service, one of the things you get is an access token, and there isn't a full REST API for the analytics service. So, you know, we're just to build these things. We just call that API. We're not got some sort of secret hook in or something like
So
that.
if you were really ambitious and wanted to tie it into some other tool that you had, you could, absolutely. And he will be showing some stuff that's coming, absolutely. So that every talk, I think, will have a view to the future versus what's just available today. Yes?
So do you have access to, what's the integration with Docker registries, and once the build is made, can I get the container that has been built downloaded to my local environment so that I can then do a build out and on-premise?
So the question is, how does it work with various Docker registries, and can I extract the container image to run somewhere else, essentially?
Yeah, I'll go for this one, please. So we're doing all releases and continuous integration using a Jenkins pipeline. The Jenkins pipeline is built using something called the Kubernetes plugin in Jenkins, which uses a Kubernetes pod in OpenShift to do the build. So the builds are all running in a pod. Then that build uses something called source to image in OpenShift to make a new Docker image. It's using something called image streams in OpenShift to create the new Docker image. That image stream is then used to download the image onto every host that runs the application. So we're using the Docker registry that's baked into OpenShift, and every image is then versioned and tagged with a new release version. So every time you do a continuous delivery release, there's a unique version number and a unique Docker image that's tagged with that version number in the OpenShift registry.
Can I drag it if I get it to download, so this is all running online?
Yeah. You can run it, download it locally, absolutely, by just using the OpenShift Docker registry directly. In many ways, if you're running it locally in Che, when you saw Pete using Che, that's actually still running on OpenShift, even though it looks like you're running it locally. So if you're using Che, you're still running everything in containers on OpenShift. But you absolutely can run it locally. You also can run it without building the Docker image as well, if you want. You could do Maven, Vertex Run or whatever, if you want to run it that way. If you're on a laptop and you want to build it and run it and using Java and Maven, you can use Maven fabricate::run, and that will build it and run it locally. But it actually runs it on Kubernetes, so it's not running actually on your local machine, it's running remotely.
One of the,
So you've got the choice of running it actually on your laptop, which you don't really want to do, but you can if you really want, or you can run it locally on Kubernetes.
And in terms of the images themselves, so one of the things that's on the roadmap is, you know, right now if you use the pipelines here, they deploy to OpenShift Online. That's what it knows how to do. The goal is to have it deploy to OpenShift anywhere, right? So regardless of where you're running OpenShift, be it you're running it locally, you're running it on another cloud provider, you're using OpenShift dedicated, you know, the idea is to, within a short period of time, be able to target all those.
Because your environments might be different clusters, right?
Correct.
It's very common for people to have a different production cluster, right? So development, testing, and staging might all be on one OpenShift cluster, and you might have another OpenShift cluster for production, maybe.
Yes, please.
If you had an on-prem OpenShift setup and you really wanted to skip the task of this today, could you download the fabricate upstream stuff?
Yes.
And then point that in all the right direction?
Yes, absolutely. So everything you see here, we're actually using this to build itself. So we're using Fabricate, we're running Fabricate on a Kubernetes cluster, and then using that to do all of our builds and deployments and runs of this. So absolutely, you can use Fabricate upstream on premise.
Maybe it's just comment, it's possible, but it's probably not going to be your easiest.
So yeah, so
Yes,
if you want to
it's-
go do it yourself and contribute in the upstream and be a part of making it run locally, it's physically possible.
But the easiest
But
thing to do is go to OpenShift.
We're not saying it's
the
easy.
easiest
All
thing,
right,
yeah.
so we are at time. I believe there might be one question in the back. Let's be quick about that. How does it integrate with CloudForms?
In many ways, it's more how does CloudForms integrate with it. But
Right.
everything runs on OpenShift, and then CloudForms has integration with OpenShift to monitor and manage everything on OpenShift. So in many ways, CloudForms takes care of that for us, which is awesome. So we don't have to worry about it. But yes.
We really tried to not get rid of and hide technologies underneath. So, Git is fully available, right? So you can push stuff into Git. We didn't hide OpenShift, so you can still use the OpenShift CloudForms integration. We're trying to just build on top of what's there and make those things available in different UIs. I mean, as an example, this build pipeline I have running here, if I go into my project here, and I go to my pipelines here, you can see it's exactly the same pipeline in exactly the same state. You can use either UI to get to it. It's just the same data, but presented in slightly different ways as we think different people appreciate data in different ways. I don't necessarily want the things that are here. I want other things if I'm a developer.
So I want to be, appreciative of people's time, because if you're going to stay for Eclipse Che, keep in your seat. You're in a good place. But if you want to go to a different session, we're 5 minutes over. So we'll give people a chance to move out. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.